Let's get talking on this one, and let's give you an idea of what this means altogether. What is the GDP? What does this mean? Does it mean more food on the table of an average Nigerian? What does it translate into good governance? And how will these give Nigerians more money in their pockets and food on their table? Let's get to hear from an economist, Mr. Amuda Yusuf. He joins us virtually from Lagos. Thank you so much, Mr. Yusuf, for joining us tonight. Give us a sense of what this means for Nigeria. Good news, I reckon. But can we rejoice, and can we now sleep and say the economy is in good hands?
Yes, It's an indication of some positive developments in the economy, because the last quarter we had 0.5% GDP growth, and this is a quantum leap. The quantum is a significant growth. It's a significant difference from what we had in Q1. We are talking about 5.01% growth in GDP. And what this reflects is the fact that the economy is gradually recovering from the shocks of the pandemic. That is what it's pointing to. Secondly, there's also a base effect dimension to it, because the 5% growth is not so much about the fact that there has been any significant change in what we are doing in terms of managing the economy. There's what we call the base effect, because this figure is a year-on-year figure. They are comparing Q2 2021 to Q2 2020. Q2 2020, we had perhaps the worst recession. We had perhaps the worst contraction in recent history. It was a contraction of about 6%. So when you compare what you have now with that kind of very serious contraction, it is very easy to understand why we have this kind of quantum growth in GDP. But having said that, just as you said in your intro, it is very difficult for the man on the streets to relate to this. From a macroeconomic analysis point of view, this is good news. But from a practical point of view, I'm talking of the man on the street now, the common man. I'm talking of those who are investors. This may still not mean much for them, because what is important for them is how the government is addressing some of the key concerns around issues of poverty, concerns around issues of spiraling inflation, the cost of food, the cost of basic items, the growing unemployment, the weakening purchasing power, the issues of security. These are things that matter the most for now. So we need to see how we align these positive developments in GDP numbers to some of these realities that the citizens are facing. That is only when these things can make some sense to the average Nigerian. Otherwise, this is just purely an academic thing.
Well, at some point, when some of us think that this is for those of us who are economic illiterates, who are thinking that, oh, this is some good news for us. But from the expert point of view, it sounds academic. But what part of these can give us joy? If you look at some of the indicators of these GDP growth, road transportation, rail, but I mean, our mainstay, oil and gas, there's a contraction in crude oil and gas, oil refining, and other financial institutions. There are contractions in this sector. Does that have an effect on the practicality of the economy at the macro level, just like you explained?
Well, the challenges that the oil and gas sector has been facing is what has manifested in the GDP numbers. The Q2 numbers indicate that we had the worst contraction in the oil and gas. Oil refining, for instance, contracted by about 47%. Crude oil and gas contracted by about 13%. All of this goes to show the challenges that the sector has been facing. Happily, we now have the PIB. We are hoping that this may change the narrative around the sector. Before now, the sector has been grappling with a lot of issues around insecurity, vandalization of pipelines, crude oil theft, and all manner of problems. In addition to that, the sector has also been grappling with challenges of policy. The regulatory environment is very tough. The policy environment, the tax environment, the fiscal terms, there are a whole lot of issues around the sector. So hopefully, the PIB, by the time the implementation begins, the Petroleum Industry Act, I keep calling the PIB, the act, which has not been signed by the president, we are hoping that that will change the narrative. But there is a concern about the refineries. The refineries has consistently been posting losses. And in this GDP number, the refineries is showing a contraction of 47%. And yet, the government is still making a proposal to continue to invest in those refineries, continue to run them, continue to manage them. I think that's, for me, is a major source of worry. But having said that, the GDP numbers generally, I think, is a good pointer that the economy is recovering. But just as I said, we need to make the GDP an inclusive GDP growth. One inclusion means is that the citizens must feel the impact. Because right now, a lot of complaints, especially around inflation, around cost of food. And this is taking a huge toll on the welfare of the citizen. I mean, if you go to the street now and tell an average man who has been complaining about the price of bread, or the price of gari, or the price of yam, and all of that, and even the price of gas, and you go ahead and say, well, there is good news, and the GDP has grown by 5%. What do you think the man will tell you? So we need to relate, we need to connect to the realities. It is good news, it is a good pointer, but we need to make sure that we align all of this, the realities that people are facing in their household, and to the realities that businesses are facing, especially around investment climate, especially around business environment, and so on.
There's one more thing that I'd like you to explain to our viewers tonight. My audience on this program are probably not your business and the economic type. They're the ones who want to listen to the politics side of things, the policy, and how governance is going in the country, which, of course, this is part of it. But if I understand it in the basic and in the layman language, the GDP is the extent of productivity that comes out of the economy. Is it? Am I right?
Well, the GDP is an estimation of the value of the total output, the total economic activities in the economy.
Great.
So when we are recording a GDP growth of 5%, it means that the activities in the economy, the outputs in the economy has grown by 5.01% between Q2 of 2020 and Q2 of 2021. Because these figures are year on year.
Okay.
So that is why I was talking about the base effect.
Yeah. So for a lot of people who have been thinking about this economy, and perhaps in some areas the doubling of the prices of products, and they're wondering whether or not they are in good hands when in terms of the economy under this government. Perhaps I may be able to show the graph to our viewers to see what things are. I opened by saying this is the biggest GDP growth in the 6 years of the Buhari government. So you can see how things are. This is the highest that we have seen the GDP grow in the last 6 years since 2015 of this Buhari administration. It went so bad, like Mr. Yusuf has said, in Q2 of 2020 during the pandemic. But now, if you give us an understanding, if this is the highest that we have seen, Does it look like something is being done under this government that is perhaps different, that should give us good news that can sustain the growth of the economy? And invariably, maybe Nigerians need to be patient a bit and they will start seeing it. Can you give us a sense of whether or not we're in good hands under the Buhari government?
Well, what I can say is that we are beginning to see some positive developments in the economy with these results. Because what this is showing is that economic activities are beginning to pick up. Some sectors that were under lockdown are now a bit more active. Generally, things are also looking positive, especially around things like oil price, and of course, in some areas of policy. But we need to do a lot more than what we are seeing, because we still have quite a lot that is of concern to both the citizens and investors. We need to do a lot more in the area of the right kind of policies, our fiscal policies, our trade policy, our monetary policy, our foreign exchange policy. We need to do a lot more in the area of even general investment environment, investment climate, our institutions, our port environment, our tax environment, our regulatory environment. These are issues that businesses still complain a lot about issue of access to foreign exchange, about the depreciation in the currency. These are big issues. But the point is that this is a positive development. We must acknowledge that. 5% GDP growth is a positive development, but just as I said, there's a very strong base effect in this number. But nonetheless, it is positive, but there's still a whole lot that we need to do. Because otherwise, the man on the street, we find it difficult to relate to what we are talking about, that the economy is doing well, and yet the price of bread has doubled in the last 1 year. The price of gari has doubled. The price of yam has doubled. So many things have doubled. These are the real things that impact on the welfare. So while we acknowledge this positive macroeconomic development, we need to do a lot more on the welfare issues. We need to do a lot more on the investment climate issues. That is the way we can make this growth inclusive. That is the way we can make the citizens appreciate a lot more what these figures mean.
So one area that I know that this government has talked about is that we have the issue of productivity, or the issue of revenue problem. And when people ask the question of debt burden, they say, look, it's still within range. Does this have any relation to the GDP growth? Is there anything that we need to worry about in terms of our borrowings and what we are producing, or how much money Nigeria makes?
Well, what we need to worry about first is the amount of resources we are currently using to service debt. Yes, there are a lot of metrics through which you measure the sustainability of debt. You have the debt to GDP ratio. If you use that ratio, of course, we are in some good standing. But the reality is that you don't use GDP to service debt. You use revenue to service debt. And we have a major revenue problem. The last numbers that we got from the finance minister indicated that, as at the report that was given as at May this year, the actual revenue, the ratio of debt service to actual revenue was over 90%. That is not a healthy financial position. So we need to do a lot more in that area. And the way to do it is to ensure that we grow the economy better, we create a better environment, because if the GDP is improving, as we are beginning to see, if investment level is improving, revenue will also increase. And when we are talking about issues of revenue, there are two sides to it. Because it's a fiscal management issue. There's the expenditure side, there's also the revenue side. So while we struggle to ensure that we optimize revenue, we should also continue to see how we can manage costs, how we can reduce the cost of governance.
All right.
That is one. Secondly, there are also areas in which we can invite the private sector to be part of the governance process, to be part of investment infrastructure, in infrastructure. So if we have a better managed environment, better structure of public-private partnership, there's a lot that the private sector can do, so that we don't have a situation where the government is saddled with everything. We can identify the projects that are bankable, that the private sector can pick up, but we need to create the confidence for such investors to be able to come in. And we need to also create an environment that is more predictable, that is not as volatile as what we have. We need a regulatory environment that is also more investment friendly. We need a tax environment that is more investment friendly. That is the way to make the economy grow. Because economic growth is about investment, it's about investors.
All right.
There's a strong correlation between the growth of investment, the growth of employment, the growth of revenue, the stability in the foreign exchange market, and all of that. There's a positive correlation around or among all these metrics. So those are some of the things I think we can do to ensure that we have a fiscally sustainable economy.
Mr. Muda Yusuf, always a pleasure having your expert opinion on some of these issues. Thank you so much indeed on such an occasion where Nigeria has recorded 5.01% in GDP growth, the highest we've seen in the last few years. Thank you so much indeed, Mr. Yusuf, for your time.